Tokyo Revengers begins by showing a young man named Takemichi Hanagaki, who is living his gloomy life in his room that looks messy and neglected. That morning, Takemichi watches a news story on television broadcasting about gang violence that has killed several civilians, including Hinata Tachibana, his ex-girlfriend in high school. He was shocked after learning about the death of Hinata and Hinata's brother named Naoto Tachibana because of the relationship they had before. The next day after Takemichi came home from work as a DVD seller at a shop, he returned home by train as usual. But when he was waiting for the train at the station, someone suddenly pushed him until he fell on the railroad tracks that a train was about to pass. Surprisingly, a miracle happened, and the accident did not kill Takemichi but took him back to the past. Takemichi goes back to 12 years ago, when he was still in high school. At first, he seemed surprised by the strangeness that happened to him, but he felt a little relieved because this meant he could still meet Hinata and Naoto. Takemichi is also reunited with his gang friends, namely Takuya, Makoto, Yamagishi, and Atsushi Sendo, or more commonly known as Akun. The five of them are a gang that actually does not have great fighting skills, but often acts tough in front of other gangs and likes to challenge other gangs. That day, Takemichi was beaten by a gang of school thugs led by a young man named Kiyomasa, who is one of the members of the strongest gang in Tokyo named Tokyo Manji. In the evening, Takemichi meets Naoto at a playground and asks him to take care of Hinata. Takemichi also tells him that in the future, Naoto and her sister will die on July 1, 2017. Even though he is unsure of that, he still asks him to make a promise that Naoto will protect Hinata. Naoto also agreed to the request by inviting him to shake hands as a sign that he would keep his promise. After shaking hands with Naoto, Takemichi again experienced a strange situation where he was transported back to the time when he had a train accident. Takemichi then wakes up in a hospital and finds that Naoto is still alive while Hinata had died in a car accident caused by a Tokyo Manji Gang member. Takemichi realizes that he has changed the future after he warned Naoto in the past, and it turns out that Naoto is also the one who has saved him from the train accident, which means the future has completely changed. Naoto then explains to Takemichi that they have changed some of the events of that time after they corrected the past, so that they still have a chance to change Hinata's destiny and save her from death. He then tells Takemichi that they can start their plan by investigating the top members of the Tokyo Manji Gang, which has now developed into a criminal group or mafia. This is because the Tokyo Manji Gang was strongly involved in Hinata's death. The gang is currently led by two of the most dangerous young men in Tokyo named Takemichi and Manjiro Sano, or better known as Mikey. Tokyo Manji Gang turned into a criminal group after Takemichi was promoted as a high-ranking Tokyo Manji leader. So Takemichi's mission this time is to prevent Kisaki from becoming the top of Tokyo Manji. Takemichi again shook hands with Naoto so he could return to the past. After returning to the past, Takemichi meets Kiyomasa and asks him to help him meet the leader of Tokyo Manji, Mikey. However, Kiyomasa, who felt offended by his words, immediately hit him until he fell to the ground. Previously, Takemichi was a cowardly young man who would let people like Kiyomasa beat and enslave him. But this time he will not back down from this fight because he has an important reason not to give up. Takemichi then challenges Kiyomasa to a one-on-one fight, and Kiyomasa accepts the challenge. Many other students witnessed the fight, because it was a very rare fight where one of the strongest people in the school would fight the weakest. In that fight, Kiyomasa was far superior to Takemichi because of his physical strength and fighting ability. Even though Takemichi was constantly beaten until he was seriously injured, he still tried to survive for quite a long time. Kiyomasa, who continued to expend energy and attacks on Takemichi, was getting overwhelmed and exhausted to beat him further. During the fight, someone suddenly appeared in the middle of the field and immediately made all the students silent and bowed to pay their respects. It turned out that that person was Ryuguji Ken, alias Draken, the vice leader of the Tokyo Manji group who always faithfully accompanies Mikey, who is currently behind Draken. Mikey saw Takemichi's persistence and immediately approached him and saved him by saying that from that day on, Takemichi is his friend. After that, Mikey immediately beat Kiyomasa, who had held a fight without notifying Mikey and asking for his permission. When he came home from school with Mikey and Draken, Takemichi asked why Mikey was interested in him, and Mikey replied that Takemichi was very similar to his brother who died several years ago. After interacting with Mikey for some time, Takemichi was surprised and could not believe that someone as good as him would become the head of a criminal organization in the future. The next day, Takemichi returns to the future to report everything to Naoto. Takemichi realizes that someone like Mikey can't possibly turn Tokyo Manji's gang into a criminal organization group, so he concludes that the person who has changed Tokyo Manji is Kisaki. That night, Takemichi and Naoto went to meet his best friend, Akun, who at that time had become a member of the Tokyo Manji group. After talking to him, Takemichi finally learned the fact that the person who had pushed him at the train station was Akun himself, where Akun was ordered by a very powerful person in Tokyo Manji to kill Takemichi. That night, Akun said that he was so afraid of one of Tokyo Manji's higher-ups that he couldn't get out of the criminal organization group. As a result, Akun chose to end his own life by jumping off the tall building. Although Takemichi is still in shock after Akun's death, Takemichi must continue their plan to change the past in order to save Hinata. Naoto then said that Takemichi had to investigate the cause of Draken's death, who died during a clash 12 years ago when Tokyo Manji's gang split into Draken's side and Mikey's side. Hearing that, Takemichi looked surprised because Draken and Mikey couldn't possibly fight each other. Naoto then asks him to prevent Draken's death, which will occur within 2 weeks after the Tokyo Manji gang split into two. After returning to the past, Takemichi is invited by Draken to come to the Musashi Shrine where members of the Tokyo Manji group usually hold meetings. During the meeting, they discuss the Mobius gang led by a young man named Osanai. Osanai and his gang are known to have beaten a friend of one of Tokyo Manji's top brass named Pa-chin, the head of the 3rd Division of Tokyo Manji. Pa-chin feels insulted because his friend has been beaten by the Mobius gang, and his friend's girlfriend has also been harassed by them. Therefore, Pa-chin asked Mikey and the other members of Tokyo Manji to take revenge on the Mobius gang. Mikey then decided to have a clash with the Mobius gang on the night of the Musashi Festival. Realizing that that night was the night where Draken was killed, Takemichi decided to prevent the clash between the Tokyo Manji gang and the Mobius gang. A few days later, Takemichi met Mikey and asked him to cancel the fight with the Mobius gang, but he was immediately beaten by Pa-chin, who felt offended by his words. Takemichi did not give up and kept trying to persuade Mikey while begging him to cancel the fight. In the midst of the debate, Osanai and all members of Mobius suddenly appear and intend to beat the Tokyo Manji gang first. The fight was very unfair because there were only 5 members of the Tokyo Manji in that place, while the number of Mobius gang members who came to surround them were more than 50 people. In the first fight, Pa-chin immediately attacked Osanai, but Osanai was able to withstand the attack and counterattacked him until he fell down. After that, Mikey stepped forward to fight Osanai, and with just one hit on the head, Mikey could make him fall helpless. Shortly after, the sound of police sirens suddenly sounded, and all members of Mobius and members of Tokyo Manji rushed to flee from the place. But instead of leaving the place, Pa-chin stabbed Osanai, who was helpless, with a broken glass bottle. As a result, Pa-chin was arrested by the police for the attempted murder, while the other members of Tokyo Manji were forced to leave Pa-chin and flee from the place. Takemichi fell unconscious because he was previously beaten, and then taken to the hospital. A few days later, after Takemichi woke up, Draken and his best friend were waiting and visiting him at the hospital. When Takemichi asks about Mikey's whereabouts, Draken looks annoyed, and it makes Takemichi feel very surprised. The next day, Takemichi realizes that there is something odd with Draken and Mikey, because the two are fighting with each other for no apparent reason. Takemichi, who realized that this was the beginning of the split of the Tokyo Manji gang that led to Draken's death, was furious and asked the two of them to reconcile. Seeing Takemichi's sincerity, Draken and Mikey decided to make up and apologize to each other. On the night of the Musashi Festival, Takemichi received news from one of Tokyo Manji's members named Takashi Mitsuya that Kiyomasa would attack Draken. Kiyomasa felt that Draken had left Pa-chin during the clash with the Mobius gang the other day, and because of that, Pa-chin was imprisoned. Therefore, Kiyomasa decided to join the other members of the Mobius gang to beat Draken together. Before Draken was ganged up by Kiyomasa and his gang, luckily Mikey and Takemichi could find Draken's whereabouts. Mikey then said that this attack had been planned by Hanmasuji, the deputy head of the Mobius gang who is currently replacing Osanai. Before the fight began, Mikey had ordered all of the division chiefs of Tokyo Manji to come to the place with their members, so that they could face the attack of the Mobius gang of 100 people. The fierce battle between the Tokyo Manji gang and the Mobius gang was very fierce, with both sides being very aggressive and full of violence. In the middle of the fight, Takemichi tried to find the whereabouts of Draken so he could protect him, but Takemichi quickly realized that he was too late after he saw Kiyomasa holding a knife that was covered in blood. After Takemichi found Draken, who was lying weakly with a stab wound in the stomach, he immediately carried Draken and took him to a safer place, while Mikey and the others continued to try to beat Hanmasuji and all other members of the Mobius gang. Long story short, Draken was successfully taken by ambulance to the hospital with the help of Takemichi and his friends. After receiving treatment and medication for several days, Draken was finally saved, and all of Draken's friends seemed happy to hear that. 1 week later, when Takemichi visits Draken at the hospital, Draken gives him a Tokyo Manji uniform, indicating that he has been officially accepted as a new member of Tokyo Manji's gang. After that, Takemichi approached Mikey, who was relaxing on the roof of the building. Mikey thanked Takemichi for saving Draken.
Arigato na, Takemichi.
The next day, Takemichi returns to the future and gets news from Naoto that he has managed to change the future and save Hinata.